Is attendance zones. I kind of broke it into three topics tonight. So first was review key learnings to neighborhood input. Second was discuss building blocks and parameters for stereo input in the first round. And third was discuss secondary scenarios. So as part of the packet, on the weekend I just went through all of the 62 neighborhood inputs and basically tallied up kind of the top rationale. I always like to do this, so like a year from now we can look back and remember what the top things we heard. So neighborhood, kind of schools, proximity, walkability was by far number one, was like 58 of the 62 had that in some form or fashion. Minimized transport time distance was like 31 approximately. And, you know, as you go through these, people use different words, different language, but by far the top three were like 58, 31, 28 were the biggest. Safety was like 16, relationships capacity was like 7. So I'd say the top three were very much the top three, and then this was kind of the top 6, and then it kind of tailed off after that. So I don't know if there's any discussion on that, but I didn't want to just go through and tally it up. And so that was key something. Again, just looking at the rationale. I did some more Sharpie map exercises, putting the neighborhoods in some smaller maps, but what I propose is perhaps Steve takes us through the building blocks he provided and some of the questions, and then I'll take you through some of the smaller maps, and I also went through what the neighborhoods suggested. So I tried to maximize, they suggested going to school, I just tried to show them. But Steve, how about we go through the building blocks you want to go through? And
sure.
Unless there's questions on neighborhood or want to talk neighborhood input. Good to go. All right, let's do it.
All right, so you in the packet you see there's a big long attachment. If it's loaded up here, it's about 60 pages. So what you will find in here, and I'll do Alexander as the example, and if there's any specifically that you want to look at, we can pull them up. So you have a 2-mile map. Actually, let's see if I can minimize this for just a minute. There. So you got a 2-mile map, and what you show on here is all the kids that live inside that 2-mile map. And then we've got the demographic tag for each of them, white, Hispanic, African American, Native American, Asian, and then other, unknown. Not everybody fills that out. Most of those are going to be zeros as you go through there, but that category is in each one of them. And then down below, you'll see all the schools listed. Those schools are all the schools that have students that attend that live inside that circle. So now let me blow this up again. So if you see on here, you've got lots of different colored circles and diamonds, and there's a square here. You've got some other colors over here. So as you look down below, you will see that, for instance, there's 81 kids from Hills that live in there, and those are going to be students that live over here. You'll see that there's 312 kids from Wood, and those will be all your purple dots here. One thing to keep in mind is that not each dot represents a child, it represents an address. So for instance, if you look over here, and that's why Alexander's a good one to take a look at, and then you scroll back down here, remember it says there's 81 kids at Hills. There are not 81 dots here. What there are is multiple students living at an address, because this is a trailer court. And so they do not all have unique addresses. They have an address at the trailer court. You'll also find houses with multiple kids, and so those kids will only be represented by one dot. If I were to look at some of the dots, if we were to blow this up, you're going to have some students that live in the Broadway area here, Taylor Drive, and again, you'll have individual addresses for an apartment building. They have separate apartments in that building, but they will only have one dot on there. So don't necessarily think of the dots as individual students, think of them as addresses within that attendance area. So what I did is a 2-mile driving distance. So why does it look like this funny polygon? Essentially what the software does is it looks up all the public roads. Remember we have that issue with the public highway transportation that we use within mandatory and discretionary transportation. So it's the public roadway. So what the software does is it maps all the public roadways 2 miles from the entrance of the school, and so you wind up with funny shaped polygons based on the driving distance from the school. And so that's why you see these kind of entertaining polygon shapes on there. So if we go down, the next map that you see is the 1 mile map. Now what I tried to do was to give you some perspective. So you'll see that the map for 2 mile, if you look at the scale on it, and if you look over here and you look at where this particular indicator is, you'll see it's the same indicator when we get down to the next one. So you got an idea for scale. If you were to lay the 2 maps over the top of each other, they're functioning on the same scale. So that gives you the 1 mile idea there. And again, you're going to see in the 1 mile, there are going to be fewer schools in there because usually there's less of an overlap. But again, what I've done for each of them then is for the home school. So in this case, it's Alexander in the 1 mile. I've highlighted the number of kids that live in there. So you see that for each of the elementary schools. So again, 20 elementary schools, 2 maps for each school. So that gives you 40 maps for our elementary schools. Now,
Steve, can I ask a quick question?
yes.
So if kids who live more than 2 miles from any elementary school are not going to appear on these maps?
They are not going to appear on this map. This only looks, at the kids that are within there. Now what I can do, and I didn't, for each one of the schools, I can also draw an exclusionary map. So for instance, in Alexander, I could ask for that school who lives beyond 2 miles. Now the problem is I tried to run that filter using all schools. Well, then it gives you every child that lives beyond 2 miles. So I can tell you how many kids, so if you look at Alexander, you look at the yellow area that's outside this particular line, obviously you're going to have some kids that are out there. And I can tell you how many kids live outside there that go to Alexander. But I can't tell you how many kids live in that geographic area that might go to another school. So I wasn't sure if that would be confusing or not. So after trying that for about 4 or 5 different ways, I did not run maps for that. That's a great question. Then as you go down, let's see if I can get to the right place, almost. Hang on, I'm not give you too much motion sickness here. Oops. We get down to the junior high maps. Did the same thing for the junior high maps, so you get a 2 mile and a 1 mile map for each. Obviously, you're going to have fewer little colored markers in there just because we're only working with 3 schools. So here's your 2 mile map for North Central. Same scale, a 1 mile map for North Central. Now I'm going to pop down to one more here. Oops. So here's City High. Now what I did with them, remember the difference there is we got a 3 mile mandatory transportation. So these are all the kids that live within 3 miles of City High. Same demographic tags, same division between the 3 high schools, so it tells you where the kids that live within there go. Then I also did the 2 mile, so you can see that. Now I did take it down a scale because you'll see the 1 mile gets too small. So the 3 mile map is at a different scale than the 2 mile map. And then I also did a 1 mile map, and that's the same scale as the 2 mile map. So for instance, this will show you that of the 226 kids that live within a mile of City High, 220 of them are City High students, 4 are Tate, 2 are West. So that's a quick drive through on that. Let me spend time here to go over the FAQ list real quick. Ready to go?
Let's do it.
Any questions on this before I pop over to that one? All right, there were several questions that were asked by board members leading up to the meeting. So what I did is I've started to compile a frequently asked questions list. At first, I just started giving you data, and I thought it might help to actually take and use the same format that I did for the other schools. So what I did was I ran maps for it. So first question was asked, how many kids live in the Garner Island? Again, I use the same scale here, so you get some idea of the 2 mile, 1 mile zone on that. So how many kids live within the North Island for Garner? We've got 153 kids in there. We've got the demographic breakdown and then where they go to school. One of the questions that may arise is, now wait a minute, you've got a kid from Wickham, a kid from Weber, a kid from Van Allen, 8 kids from Penn, you got another kid from Lincoln. Remember that it's been our policy in the past that if you moved out of your home school attendance area and you moved into another school attendance area, we allowed you to complete your elementary years at your original school if you wanted to transport. So presumptively, we've got a group of kids that may have moved into the Garner attendance area, but came from another attendance area. We have fewer kids now that are out of their home school for ELL programming, but there are still some kids that are out. So for any given elementary school, some of those non-resident students that are going to school in a different attendance area may be ELL kids. They may also be special ed kids. So those numbers are not disaggregated. Once you get down into numbers that are this small, obviously they become identifiable. So we just simply identify which school they attend rather than being Garner students. Next question that was asked was, how about the North Lincoln Island? There are 124 kids that live in the North Lincoln Island. Again, I tried to use the same scale as we go through this, so you should recognize some consistency with that. We've got 124 kids in the island. In the West Island for Twain, so this is the Lake Ridge neighborhood, we have 80 students. Again, this is a good example why you don't necessarily see 80 dots in there, because not all of those folks have individual addresses, although many do in the back part of that subdivision. How many students live in the North Island of Man? I titled it North Island. If you know the attendance area, if you looked at the maps closely, you know that there's actually a very thin strip of land that runs along the river that, at least at low tide, connects the North Island and the main Man attendance area, but no one lives there, so it made it very easy to draw a demarcation point between that North Island and the main part of the attendance area. There are 103 students that live there. One of the questions that's been asked, Chris and I were just talking about it on the way in, there's, at least since I've come to town in the last 6 years, there have been a lot of questions about the Forest View Trailer Court and some potential development that may or may not take place in that part of town as they look to build a new gateway into the north part of Iowa City off the interstate there. So the question was, how many kids live there? If I were actually to blow this up to scale, you can see there's only a handful of dots there. Again, that's because of the individual address issue. There are 62 kids that live in that particular area. Most of those kids are obviously Man kids at 57, but we do have a couple that are attending other schools in the district.
If I could just chime in again, the impression I've been getting about that is, well, yes, something might happen, but for now, I mean, I think we have to assume they are there.
I think so too.
Because I was a little worried if we're suddenly going to lose 62 kids from one of our elementary schools, we got a hole we got to fill somehow. But
I told Chris that was, I think my meeting with the folks about developing that was my second or third week in the district 6 years ago. So that's been an ongoing topic of conversation, but I, at least at this point in time, haven't seen a lot of traction with that. So I think you're right. I think we assume that those students are still main students at this time. And then, oops, lost one. The question was, how many students currently live east of Scott Boulevard, not counting those north of 80 or south of 6? So if you follow this line here, this literally goes right up Scott Boulevard. For those of you that know Scott Boulevard here, it goes right north of our facility, so it's right out here. And runs up and connects with Dodge. So I went all the way over there. Now, before you think that looks kind of funny, keep in mind ACT is up here. There are actually no kids up here, so you see that there are no dots up there. So that area is essentially all commercial property right now. Dots representing kids, so this is where the kids that are in that block live. So we've got a lot of area out here that doesn't have any kids. There are 351 kids that fit that south of the interstate, north of 6, and east of Scott Boulevard. You see the breakdown of where those kids go to school. Majority of them are at Lemme and Lucas, with a good chunk at Longfellow that live in that Longfellow Island. And then the last question that was asked was, given the issues that we've had with Lincoln Elementary School and where it feeds and the grandfathering process that existed, how many kids from the Lincoln catchment area in Manville Heights actually have matriculated through to City High? We have 34 of those kids at City High, 24 kids of those kids are at West High. Now, I had to try to do a little drilling on here, and I'm not sure that I got it all the way down, but most of the 24 kids appear to be upperclassmen, and the 34 kids are spread fairly evenly amongst the 4 grades. So I think what we see there is we've had quite a few kids that have looked ahead and said, I'm going to City, and so they've matriculated fairly evenly there. And then we've got some kids that may have been the last in a family that are upperclassmen at West right now. But again, I stopped drilling as I got down there, so that's just my initial impressions from doing the first look at the data.
Steve, I'm curious about that. Does the kids who go to West High School, do they get a bus?
Right now, City High is the home attendance area for the high school kids. Northwest is the home attendance area for junior high. So we bus kids to Northwest, not to Southeast. It actually is inside the 3-mile limit, so they are not bused to City High.
And they're not bused to West High?
They're not bused to West High.
Okay.
We only send buses to home attendance areas, and so since cities, the home attendance area, that would be where they're based. So again, my idea with this is I presume you'll have more questions as we go through our discussions, and I'll continue to compile those and add those to this document, and then I'll work with Kristen, and after tonight, we'll get that out on the website so that people can see it and have access to the same information without having to go digging for it. So thanks in advance for asking those questions. I'm getting a little bit better with the software every day I play with it, so hopefully I can continue to get those questions asked and answered for you. Lori?
I don't mean to be nitpicky,
Yeah.
but my address on here says that I'm 2 miles within Northwest, or I'm 4 houses from being 2 miles from Northwest, but my entire neighborhood here shows that it's within 2 miles of Northwest.
Is this
It's
on
not
the
on the FAQs, it's back on
First
the
document?
maps.
Yeah.
So I'm just pointing out, and also I've noticed that with a few of the maps, there's differences between these maps and the other maps that we had that had the incremental coloring.
Different software. That uses Versatrans, which is far more accurate than the underlying mapping software in here is Google. And so it's not quite as accurate as our Versatrans software. So one of the reasons why I actually selected this scale is not to drill down too far, because this is really more than anything else to give us a general idea what the
Okay,
numbers
yeah.
are.
And I just think that like when we're ready to make decisions according to who's getting bused and who's not
Yeah.
getting bused, we need to look at those other maps because they'll be a lot more accurate.
Yeah, and actually, if I can get it to come up here. Apparently our home, our school is not the home on here. If you.
So I can tell you, we've got a whole neighborhood here that's getting bused that is,
And that
more
may
than
be the
2
case.
miles.
If you're familiar with, oops, let's do this. Scroll down. If you're familiar with our maps, you're more familiar with, where are maps?
Left.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Keep moving things around in here. So if you look at, well, let's, I didn't want to go to these maps. Well, I'll just do this so you can see it.
It's under miscellaneous, so there you go.
Ooh, no, we don't want that. Let's do this.
you don't have to show us, but
But
I'm just saying when we're getting to that point.
These maps are generated with, I was gonna scroll down so you can see it down here, oops. We use Johnson County GIS here. They do these maps for us. So we don't have access to this yet. This is the next set of software I wanna learn how to do. These are far more accurate than the other maps that I'll show you that will be part of the, part of our mapping software with Guide K-12. So this map, as you can see from the lines as you look at it, is going to be far more accurate than what we're drawing with Guide K-12. That's really right now designed to give us some good numbers about how many kids are inside it.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
The reason why, maybe this is guided right, or maybe this is you all, that we keep using African American as the race of, because that's more speaking to ethnicity.
Yep.
And included in that is multiple ethnicities, and African American is one.
Yep.
Is there a reason why that keeps rolling out? Because that also is adding to some of the confusion in our other data, is that we're not being specific about black as in race, but not as an ethnicity, because that also speaks to the different ELL and other cultures that's represented in that, and it speaks historically differently about.
That is a great question. This software updates every night, Monday through Friday, from our Power School data. Our Power School data fields are defined by the state. So the unknown other, Asian, Native American, those are all, you might think, well, could it be Arab American Indian there instead of Native American? Those are all the state definitions that we use when we fill out Power School. So if you're a parent and you're logging in and you're filling out all that demographic data, those are the only choices you're given right now, because those are the choices we're given by the state.
So the state is using inaccurate.
I won't comment on accuracy or inaccuracy, I'll just tell you that those are the state designations. So, other questions on this?
We have to live in FRL, or should be enrolled.
Do we have the live-in FRL? That gets back to Chris's question, so I'm just gonna pop over here and pull this up and read it to you. So, no, you don't have access to the live-in FRL, and part of that is because we collect data for federal purposes for Title I, and we do that every October 1st, which is our snapshot date, and then that gives us an official FRL count for each school. And that's used throughout the remainder of the year. That number is publicly disclosable, so we have that. But we are not able to use that FRL data for any other purposes. So later in the year, we can't necessarily pull it up and use it for something else. So that data is not available to you as we go through this process.
So Steve, does that mean that when we generate a scenario, you can't tell us the FRLs for the new things because we might be able to put 2 and 2 together and narrow down some smaller portion?
Yep.
Okay, is there some
That's why I
alternative that we
inadvertently
can
thought I was
use?
going to pull up a heat map there, which gave
Right,
me
yeah.
a little bit of a conniption there.
I mean, you must have discussed before whether there's alternative.
Yeah, so
Indicators
I'll
that we
just
could use.
read this to you. This comes from the Iowa Department of Ed, and this was part of a process we went through last spring. One of the, I'll just read it to you, it's easier to read that way. Working with the Iowa Department of Ed, one of the criteria that we are now using to balance student demographics in our attendance area development process is socioeconomic learner status as identified as low SES students in the district's student data management system. We've received many questions about the identification process. I've conferred with the DE, and they have helped us to craft the following response to such inquiries. The district determines socioeconomic learner status for individual students using a variety of sources, including federal food and nutrition free reduced lunch data, the direct certification process through the Department of Education and Human Services. We have a process that allows direct certification of students who don't fill out the FRL forms. Participation in qualified programs like homeless youth and migrant education. At no point are individual financial records accessed directly. All of the previously listed programs require parents to actively enroll or provide qualifying financial data. Each of these processes ensures FERPA provisions are met and only authorized users can access any of these sets of information. This information is then converted into a low SES designation for qualified students in our student data management system.
So that you can tell us. On the
That we
scenario.
can tell you. We can't tell you just the FRL number. So the problem with that is in order to roll that data up, it's time consuming. So we won't do that and advertise it for each scenario. As we get closer to the end and we have 2 or 3 scenarios, then I'll run those numbers and we'll be able to see it for those attendance areas. It's on the USDA would say it's on a need to know basis, and you don't need to know.
Right.
So we can check the box on that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty
And I can provide this to you. That's the email I sent to the board last spring, so I can actually forward it to the rest of the board so you have that language.
Now, I am kind of still thinking, I hate to see all those students disappear who live more than 2 miles from any school. And I don't know how, I mean, what I'd be happy with is just this type of map plus just the current attendance area with the current attendees marked inside the current attendance area. I mean, I gotta hold them up against each other. But I don't know if you can outline the attendance areas easily on this particular software.
Yes, so what I could do for you, which is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, I went through that. So the one map you don't have, let me just pull one up. So what I could do is I could give you a third map. And it would look a little different than this one because what I could do is this is Alexander Elementary School 2-mile map. What I could do is give you an Alexander Elementary School greater than 2-mile map, but down here it's only going to have Alexander kids that live in that 2-mile area. Now what it will show you though is the map is going to look a little different than this because I'm going to zoom a little bit further out because there might be Alexander kids that live right
Up
now.
in north of,
Yep.
I know, that's
so
the
you're going to get a
problem.
different scale, but you'll have the count.
Okay.
So you'll be able to see that. That's pretty straightforward. I can run that for all 29 schools or 26 schools.
That was actually kind of interesting data a number of years ago. I think even before Chris and I were on the board, and you're able to see where every student comes from that attends each elementary school. You know, that was really eye-opening data.
What it does essentially, although it's 29 pages long, is it's that live-in attend chart that we just looked at tonight, but then done in a graphical format. So you can look at each school and see where the dots fall outside that 2-mile range.
But when you give me the map that you described, the greater than 2-mile map with Alexander students only marked on it, I'm still not going to see the Alexander attendance boundaries on that map.
Well, the yellow bounce, the yellow.
Oh, that's the yellow.
Yep, the
Okay,
yellow
good.
is, sorry, I should have said
That'll
that.
work,
Yep, the
yeah.
yellow is. Now, I'll give you one caveat. Kim knows because she's seen me go through this. The number, or the colors that are associated with the attendance area is a randomized process that the software has. So I
You
can't
got yellow on
guarantee you
yellow,
that on the
yeah.
next map it's gonna be yellow. I think each session I go in, they get randomized, so if I work all in one session, they are all the same colors. But after I log out, log back in, sometimes I lose the colors,
So
so.
whatever color Alexander is, for instance, those students all throughout the district will be that
Yes,
same color.
yeah, you would see them, if they're yellow circles, they'll be yellow circles and they'll be in the Penn attendance area or the Garner or wherever they are. And actually, maybe what I'll do, Chris, just so that you see the counterpoint, I'll do the inside 2-mile map for just the Alexander kids, because I think that might help too, is to say.
Okay, sure. We have
okay,
some of those already, don't we?
Yeah, because right here, you see that there's 272 kids, but there are also all those other colors that
Right.
are mixed up in there. I can just essentially do a plus 2 mile, minus 2 mile for each of the schools.
I mean, my feeling would be, as far as the beyond 2-mile map, I'd be fine just seeing the attendance there. You don't have to show me North Liberty if there's one Alexander student up there. I mean, to zoom in just on the yellow for
Okay,
Alexander.
and then you'd be able to
show
see
me
the numbers
ones that
down
are
below, so I can
outside
use the
this
same
boundary
scale.
would be fine, yeah.
And then, all right,
I mean, there's gonna be a handful of people from somewhere else, that'd be fine.
sure.
And that's just me.
What else do you need to see?
I would like to see a closest school map.
That I'm working on.
And, you know, if we did it, one for the elementary school, one for the junior high, one for the high school. And I just want to, one of the main reasons I would like to have that map is to explain to people why we can't necessarily send them to their closest school. Not because I want to send everybody to their closest school, I know you can't. But when we have to tell people, you know, why aren't you sending me to my closest school? We can point the map and say, because that's his closest school for 1,000 people.
That's an array map. Again, we did this with the GIS system with Johnson County. It literally took every address in the district and said, send those kids to their closest schools.
Uh-huh.
So that's every address in an array. So that's why it kind of looks like a starburst there. And here's what it looks like if you then turn it into a geographic pattern. So
Yeah,
I'm
that's
trying to
what I'd
find a
like to
source
see.
file for this so that we can actually get this up and posted. So it's called a straight line distance map.
Straight line distance, though.
Yep.
Is there
Yeah.
any way we can do driving distance?
No, we couldn't figure out how to do that because this software doesn't have that capacity. So we're using two different platforms. So that's a straight line distance map. That's why these are all, you see them as all straight lines. So it's not the same thing as the driving distance with the goofy looking polygons that we get up there. So I will add that to my list though. I've got a call scheduled tomorrow morning with the Guide K-12 folks. So I'm compiling questions because I did not get all of your questions answered. There were about 6 questions that you shared with me that I wasn't able to get done. Actually, I'll show you one more. This is one that, again, we did with the GIS software. This is a half mile, and I want to say from a walk zone. I think we overlaid the driving distance maps onto the GIS map. So I think this is a half mile walk zone for each school with driving distance. But the GIS guys weren't sure how we did that. So we got to figure that out again. It's been a couple of years since we did this.
You know, my feeling is straight line closest school map, don't bother.
Yeah. Well, this one I think is driving distance. We did this one in 2014 though. So
Right, although that's a different thing than
yeah.
closest school.
So if we could get this in a mile, this in 2 miles, I know this is what Chris wants. So I'm trying to figure out how
Well,
to do
those would be
this.
useful.
Yeah.
But there's no way to do a driving distance straight line school map?
I don't know yet.
All right.
So I'll add that to the
Looking
list.
into it would be good, because
Yep.
I think it'd be useful.
Yep.
But Chris, you can just add the numbers together. Are you just looking for the number? Because on the 2 mile and the 1 mile maps, you can just add up
No,
all
you
the
can't,
kids
because
that live
sometimes the
there.
2 mile for one school overlaps the 2 mile for another school, and you don't know which of those students are closest to this school as opposed to that school.
I think part of it, maybe if I walk over and show you this, because it's hard to see from a distance.
I see.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
when you, I know that they were talking about before, is like here even on a half mile, you got an
Sure.
overlap in there.
Sure.
So it'd be really nice not only to see the overlap, but to see how many kids live. because I know that was one of the questions that Chris asked, which I couldn't get the answer to. So if there's an overlap on two of these areas, how many kids live in there? And it'd be really nice to not only see how many kids live in there,
Interesting.
but let's get the color dots on them. Where do they go to school? So we're asking them all kinds of questions people haven't asked before, so they've been very cooperative, but they don't always have the answers right away, so.
These are great theoretical, but then you get into minimizing disruption and it's, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also natural barriers. And, you know, not everybody wants to go to the closest school.
I have a quick question. So I know it's listing where other kids are attending, even if they live in that area.
Right.
So what happens next year when we don't have a whole sign up? Do these kids go back to their home schools or what happens?
We don't know that yet. The state has not told us what they're gonna do with SINA. Technically, it's not even next year, it's really the year after that. That's when E ESSA goes into effect. So next year is supposed to be the soft landing year for us. The last conversation that I had with Ryan Wise is that I talked to him this week or was it last week? This week. That they hope to have some more information available to us in about a month. Because they're supposed to develop for the U.S. Department of Ed a rollout process for how they're going to implement in the fall of 17, which is supposed to describe the soft landing for us next year. And part of that is what happens with SINA status, what happens with the SINA rights that the kids have, and so they have to go through and the state has to define all of that. So I don't have an answer for that yet.
And so what, I mean, so at that point, since we don't know the answers to this, maybe I can't answer, but I'm just thinking about, will they be assigned according to our boundaries, according to their home school or the school that they finished 6th grade?
See, that's a question that we don't know because, and one of the questions I asked Ryan was, are the state rules going to supersede district rules? Because if SINA says they have to go, if the state says they can't go, what if we say they can? Or vice versa. So, what if we looked at it and we said, look, from a least disruptive standpoint, if you're on a SINA transfer, we're going to let you stay. Is the state going to tell us, no, you have to make them go back? So those are the kinds of questions we've asked the state, which I hope they take into consideration when they come up with some guidance for us. I'm hoping they give us the greatest latitude that they can, because then that would allow us to look at it and say, hey, if you've been at Hoover for 4 years, well, let's let you finish.
Now, I have a 0.5 mile map that you made last year.
Which
that
one
has
is-
circles on it.
Yeah, that's the one with the GIS, isn't it? That one, that is your straight line map. We just dropped those on there. The Johnson County folks just dropped them on there, so that gives you just a half mile or a mile circumference.
And that's from what
But-
year?
No driving
Just
distance. We did that
this was
last
done
year.
last spring.
But that was one, again, that the board looked at and said, not sure how useful that is because
Yeah.
it's not driving distance.
But you can see where the circles overlap, at least. I mean,
And that
that
does
gives you
have
some idea.
the new schools on it, though. It's recent enough to have the new schools on.
Yeah, yeah, we did that after we hit the set last year. Now I gotta find that one. Because it's in my pile here.
Good with that.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll keep taking, call these building blocks, right?
Yeah.
The longer we stay in building blocks,
And
probably the better.
please keep sending your questions like this that you're coming up with, because it's twofold. First of all, if we can't do it, then I can continue to work with Guide K-12 and the Johnson County folks and figure out how to get those maps done. And then I'll just keep upgrading those and posting them out to the website so people can see them. So if you've got questions about blocks like the Forest View Trailer Court or something like that, just send those to me and I'll build those out and get them out as quickly as we can.
Can move on.
Yep.
So, I know everybody liked the super cool Sharpie map. I mean, Steve uses the technology, I use a Sharpie, but one thing I tried to do on the weekend, do we have that? Well, we call it the Hoover one.
Oh, you want yours? I'll let you get that.
So, a couple things. One is I just tried to put the neighborhoods on smaller maps and start to figure out where exactly they were. You know what I mean? It's one thing to look at Hoover on this map and we're all like, in this little area. I tried to get them on, that's good, that's good. So this is actually a Hoover East map. So you can see the school here. And I won't go through every single neighborhood, but 49, I should run my cheat sheet, it's 49 Windsor Ridge.
Yeah.
Windsor Ridge is on there, and you can just go by number. So 38 was Red Wing Estates, 59 was Tree Farm Lane, and just tried to get these on some smaller maps. And I actually drew a few boundaries. I tried to look at minimizing, just like the rationale was, maximize walkers, minimize busing, and then just looked at the neighborhood preference. So I think, Chris, you asked for the Scott Avenue building block. I think everybody east of Scott
Yeah.
asked for Hoover East except this neighborhood right here, which was by Lemme. So that's why I just did a little jot around and kept them in there. So I just tried to put a boundary where the neighborhood would ask for it. To double check, make sure it's right.
You got the neighborhoods outlined though, because 49, my impression was 49 did not extend up into that orange area.
No, I just put it approximately where it is. So I didn't try to outline I didn't have that much
Yeah, I
time.
know. Can we see these?
Yeah, I'll send them to you and we'll post them. I want to review them here before we post them because there's some, I put some boundaries on here. This neighborhood had a couple individuals ask, to stay at Southeast City, so I think that's probably another building block, the Bon Air, Saddlebrook
Okay, I can do that.
group. Could be a candidate for Hoover East or Lucas. Let's go down. What's the next one? Just go down, second page. Oh, this is Lemme. So just down a little more. There were a few neighborhoods that asked for Lemme, 30, 27, 37, 17. These are mostly the Hoover neighborhoods. And again, what's interesting in Lemme, so one concept, there's probably going to be some areas, you can tell in here there'd be some areas that might require busing because it goes beyond the 2 mile. So that's just another thing I was looking at. But I like using these 2 mile maps because you can start to tell where the busing might be in this scenario. But, so 30 was Bel Air, 27 was Washington Park, 37 was Court Hill subdivision. If you go down one more, I tried to zoom in on Hoover because I was trying to do what you were doing, Chris. So I was like, where the heck are these neighborhoods? So I didn't draw the boundaries, but 27 was Washington Park. 30 was Bel Air. 37 was Court Hill subdivision. And then there was a couple that asked for Longfellow. So 55, Morningside Drive, 57 Muscatine Ave, and 29 Hoover Triangle asked for Longfellow. So just looking at what the neighborhoods asked for and not basically thinking of anything else, this was kind of how it split out. And I probably should include this as part of Lemme here too, but they just...
Just for the record, a number of those did put Hoover
Yeah, you're right.
as their first choice.
They all did. Every Hoover neighborhood put Hoover, current Hoover as the next. So one more, was that it? So that was kind of just trying to get the neighborhoods on a smaller map and see where the heck they are. In the Grant area, go to the other one. Did the same thing. I won't go through all the neighborhoods. 54, 23, all these neighborhoods asked, if you want to go down, ask for Grant. Just got right there. Welch Village, I think 4 out of the 5 of them asked for Grant and then 1 asked for Wickham. So that Welch Village could be up in the air a little bit, but Welch Village is basically right in here.
And that's
By the
North
way, I
Lincoln.
just put these in the approximate area. I wasn't going to. So Welch Village is like here.
That's North Lincoln right now?
Yeah, this is North Lincoln. So this is actually a grant 2-mile radius. Did I do that? Oh, okay. So this is like Squire Point up here, Stony Point. This is like Forest Gate, that's Olinger.
Is this their first preference only?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I tried to, as long as they were within walking distance, I just put it there. It took a while to go through all 62, so let's go down. Okay, so this is still Grant, just go up a little bit. Still looking at, this is the Garner map, but still looking at Grant. And again, what I tried to do here, this was interesting, so I just tried to look at where does busing start and where do the walkers end. And again, thinking that it's kind of back to what you've been doing. Kerner's gonna have lots of kids that can walk there. Penn's gonna have lots of kids that can walk there. And in fact, in this scenario that I drew out here, Van Allen, Garner, Penn, and Wickham could all be walking schools. And Grant would be the school we bus kids to. If you think about it, actually all 5 of them today have some form of busing going there. If you think about optimization, if we could get the number of busing schools down to a smaller number, larger kids, you can optimize your busing a lot more, right? But it's also what people have asked us for. I mean, if kids can walk to school, why not let them go there? But anyway, I tried to build all that in. It gets complicated, right? But so 62 picked Gardner over. That was their first choice. The question with that island, of course, is do we have the capacity to put it there? And Gardner's like way over capacity, so I won't even say my point of view, but I think it's going to be a challenge to get that whole island in. So if you go down, I guess I just threw a few of the extra neighborhoods on. Let's go to the next page. What that was. Wickham put on the neighborhoods. Put on a few of the other ones here too. These guys asked for Christine Grant. 26 asked for Wickham. 1932. The Stables. I don't have a number on that. Well, it's probably on a map to count. The Stables asked for Wickham. And then there's an area here, when you look at the Van Allen map, that's bust. So there's an opportunity to redistribute that somewhere where it's not Van Allen potentially. So they want to be busing. I don't think there's hardly any kids there, but if we go to the next one, we probably see the Stables. Go down a little. So 44 asked for Van Allen. 43 is right beside North Central. And you had a whole bunch in here, Dempster Drive, etc. All these asked for Van Allen. And then, of course, the Stables was kind of split, but it had the majority going to Wickham. So basically took that whole bottom half because you can't walk to Van Allen, or it's over 2 miles from Van Allen. Just keep going. What's the next one? Yeah, keep going. It's not a Van Allen. Did we skip a Van Allen? No, I guess that was a Van Allen. So that was the Van Allen map. Gardner, same thing. All these neighborhoods asked for Gardner pretty much. Key questions need to be up here. Do we have the capacity to do it? It's the last one. Penn. Penn was kind of the same deal. Everybody asked for Gardner. The question is, again, for us, I think it's going to fill up with the walkers. And, when you start to see busing up here, I think, well, the question, do we have the capacity at Penn? And probably the answer is no. And if we're going to bus them, do we bus them to Kristen Grant's kind of a, but at least minimum, this gets the neighborhoods on a little bit smaller map so you can see it. That's what I was trying to do. But also thinking about maximizing walkers, minimize busing, maximizing the neighborhood input. So I'll send that to everybody and we can post. I kind of want to review it here just to it's hot off the presses. So next step, Steve, do you think you got some more building blocks to do?
Yep.
And, you know, maybe even the next round, we just keep doing building blocks. The building blocks may start looking more like scenarios. But
Well, we could put them together. You know.
yeah. I'm just thinking, why don't we keep it as building blocks for one more round, and then we can talk next time about scenarios starting to gel. You know what I mean?
Yep, so again, I would say if you've got
Things you wanna see.
any of those building blocks, any of those pieces that you think I can put together like that, if you'd send those to me, I'll try to get those done as quickly as possible. The next session is the 22nd, so I'll do what I can. That's gonna be tight though, because we'll get spring break in between, so we'll see what we can get done. I'm getting better at the software, I don't know if I'm with miracles, but I'll get done what I can.
I'll just say too, that from experience, that sometimes it's easy to ask for a dial, right, because it's clear what it is.
Yeah, like
Yes.
Bon Air,
But, right,
doing it right now.
if it starts to split things, then drawing the map doesn't hurt, because there's many times we've been here talking about a scenario, and we think we're talking the same thing, and we're not. And just, you know, try it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hesitant to say this, but we don't have a meeting on the 29th, do we?
Education.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's,
Possible to do the work session after that instead of,
that's what I was just thinking. If Steve needs an extra week, we could move the work session to the 29th.
We could have 22nd and consider 29th as well, quite frankly. As soon as spring break's over, we find ourselves in May pretty quick.
Why don't we do that? I mean, so we're all aligned, we're not gonna blow our brains out over spring break, right? Everybody takes spring break off. Some of these, I know you got a pretty good idea, you can pound them out quick, right? But see where we're at on the 22nd.
And
I mean,
I'll
if
keep, I'm gonna keep working with those guys from the GIS and the folks from Guide K-12, and they may not be able to help me figure out how to do some of this stuff tomorrow morning, but by the time I get back, they ought to hopefully have some better directions for me.
I mean, if we did meet on the 22nd, I don't think, I wouldn't want you to turn stuff around by the 29th for scenarios anyway. So I would say it's either the 22nd or the 29th. Although I guess that puts you in the position of then having to turn things around. When's our first meeting, when's our first work session on this in April?
Well, it's the first meeting, whatever the first meeting in April is.
Well, that's gonna be 2 weeks later then, right?
I've actually got some time
So you
blocked
still have 2
out
weeks.
between the 22nd and the 29th, so I don't mind you telling me, okay, we need this stuff done between the 22nd and 29th. I think I've got some time to do that. So,
If
So
we're
it's
working in
just a question of
K-12,
whether we're-
the K-12 stuff is.
yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I'll struggle a little bit with the GIS stuff until I get
It's
somebody to do
GIS,
some
it
training
slows
for me.
down.
Well, are we gonna be ready on the 22nd then is the question, or do we want
That
to
might be the other issue.
So if it's a 5-minute meeting, fine.
Sure.
Anything else in elementaries?
so if we have specific ideas on where specific neighborhoods should go, do you want that information? Yeah, or
I tell you what, I don't necessarily want to know where it's going to go, but if you want to tell me, hey,
identify the movable?
number 8
Can I just
or
say-
something, if you can send me that, I can pull those out.
Like say this street to that street.
Mhm.
Maybe you'll tell us how many students are in it, is that the idea?
But yes, if you think you have an idea where you want to go, that's just.
And if you know based on this map, if it's easy for you to say, hey, I want to know where 50 goes, how big 50 is, that's a pretty easy one for me to look at it and say, how did they define it? It's, I think is that Galway Hill? No. Windsor Ridge. Windsor Heights, Windsor
Cardinal
Ridge, one of
Ridge.
those, Cardinal Ridge. You know, that's one that I could say, okay, I kind of pull up Google Maps next to it and I say, what did they define it? How does it look like when I look at it on Google Maps? Now, how does it look in Guide K-12? And then do some parcels around there. And it's like you said before, it won't be as scientific as these kind of maps are, but it'll give you a pretty good idea what the numbers are.
But you know, again, early diverge, so I'd rather, if there's ideas, let's get them out now, because we're diverging, right? At some point, we'll want to come back in and start converging.
Well, if I were to come up with an idea 2 days from now and say, Steve, can you tell me this number? Are you just gonna tell me that number?
No, what I'll do is, let's say, for
Well,
instance,
pretty-
he said,
pretty
can you
bad
do,
questions.
which is the one I'm fiddling around with right now.
So you'll just add it to the.
Can you do Bon
frequency
Air?
list?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll do that same kind of thing I did with the FAQ list, and it'll say, okay, Bon Air has 50 kids in it, and they go to these schools. I already deleted that, so
Okay.
playing Saddlebrook now, so,
So that means I just
42
feel a little
kids.
bit less pressure to
yeah.
figure it out right now.
Yeah, yeah, and like he said, I'm pretty good with the guide K-12, like, depending on how you define Saddlebrook, there's 42 kids, and I did that one already. So, some of those I can do pretty quickly if I know, and especially using these, where the users kind of define the neighborhoods, that really helps me figure out what the bound is.
So I have a question. Chris, some of the things you put up there for North Liberty would require changes that those parents didn't ask for. And I realize that minimizes some busing and
Only
things.
one,
But can we just define Grant and leave the rest of North Liberty alone, since they generally like where they're going to school?
Well, I think we should start, I think a good starting point is Grant and Hoover East. I think we should start there and see what the dominoes are.
Because I am not interested in moving kids for the purpose of having a map that looks nice. If there's an island, there's an island. I'm okay with that. Even if it doesn't look perfect on the map, if kids are going there, that's where they want to stay, it's fewer transitions for them, I support that.
Yeah. I just think so it depends what you mean by defining Grant. I mean, we need to get the capacity right at Canton Gardner and Grant, right? And that's where I think the watch out is we don't get too theoretical, because I think you just start to look at, okay, let's just take Gardner today. I agree with you. If we agree to walkability, minimize busing, neighborhood choice, and minimize disruption, you just look at Gardner today and go, how many kids can I take there? And it's the same thing with Penn. It's the same thing with Penn. I think what you're going to find, that's going to be the tough question. What's the capacity? How many kids are we going to have?
I mean, it seems like at some point you face a choice between when you're reaching out from Grant, you could take people, there are certainly Garner neighborhoods that are closer to Grant, but they're really close to Garner. Whereas then the other choice is to reach way far out that are not closer, particularly close to their current schools and bring them to Grant, but then you're, of course, reaching way far out, so.
Maybe, but if you're already being bussed.
I understand logic, but I mean, that seems like the two different possible ways of thinking about it. Neither one's ideal. I mean, it doesn't make sense to take people who live right next door to Garner just because they're the ones who live closest to Grant.
I think next time if we do a few of these building blocks like I've laid out, I think by next time we'll be able to have this conversation a little more
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is,
knowledgeable.
you could imagine starting at 10, right?
Yep.
Starting at 0 and saying, all right, let's take the most obvious closest thing, put it in there, closest thing, put it in there until we get to 587 or whatever it is. That might make sense for Penn. It doesn't necessarily make sense for Grant.
Maybe. I'm optimistic. Same with Hoover East. I think we do Hoover East and then see where the dominoes fall. And I'm going to be interested to see. It's going to be interesting to see how these neighborhood inputs pan out. It's actually pretty amazing. When I was doing this on the weekend, I was pretty amazed how. I know we don't have to make the graph look good, but the neighborhoods were kind of aligned. Like this, people want to go to Lemme, and these people want to go to, and there wasn't any weird shape. And kind of the same with Grant. There wasn't any weird shape, so it's kind of like it kind of made sense.
Now, if we're gonna focus on socioeconomic balance, though, that's a whole different thing. And since that's so important to us, I think we better make sure we address that in elementaries, especially on the east side, because they have the biggest space between the high and the low.
Yeah.
In Coralville, there's also Kirkwood and Wickham, but all the west side Iowa City elementaries are pretty balanced. They're all around 30, 40.
Yep.
But not on the east side.
Right. And this is our chance to do it.
So that's where I'm afraid we're going to get into some islands that it might not be the closest to school, but it's still within 2 miles. Still no busing needed, but it might not be the very closest school to you.
Could be. I don't. No idea.
Well, the language isn't in policy about islands anymore, so, but that said, there's somewhat of an eyeball test as well to the uninvolved eye. If people look at boundaries, you also don't want island here, islands all over the place. But I don't, since it's not in policy anymore, I mean, there's islands right now all over the place in our district. And as we just saw from neighborhood, but some of those islands that are exceptionally happy, they're going to school.
Generally, they like where they're going.
Exactly. And I think that's a key point.
Uh-huh. That's why I don't have a problem with it. I think, you make the right decision according to, in my opinion, what the parents want, the least disruption for the kids and balance. And considering the 2 mile parameters as well. So we're not fussing unnecessarily.
I think that's going to be really difficult to do.
Yep.
Yeah, it will. It will,
Because
definitely.
a lot of families, I mean, obviously from our neighborhood input, most families, no one said, I wanted to go to a higher FRL school.
You're exactly right.
Most people were like,
Yep.
it wasn't even an option. And then you didn't hear any feedback from those neighborhoods, so that also tells the story about our district. One is very historic, we can look back for years, it's been the same story being told over and over again. We have a responsibility about how we respond to that, because what we do is gonna echo, I keep saying it, 10, 15, 20 years down the line about what it is that we do. And it's not about what feels good, it's gonna be what's best for kids. If we're really looking about student achievement should be the thing that's driving us. I don't know if that's necessarily so much socioeconomic status, because that makes an assumption that if you are a low socioeconomic status student, that you are a poor student. So I'm just saying, I don't know what that looks like, but no one ever considers how do we move kids according to smaller classrooms so that they can get more help so that we can actually work on our core goals. I don't know how you do that, but that's a different story than just only looking and assuming that if you come from a low-income family, you're a poor student. Like, not poor as in just financially, but that you're not a good student. Because that is the story that we tell from week to week is, well, if you're from a low-income family, your student achievement is really poor, it's really low. But that's what the language is that we use, we gotta address this because these are our poor students, so that means that they don't succeed successfully.
Well, that's not what I'm saying.
I'm just saying overall,
That's not what I'm saying.
that is what the message comes out, is that if you are a poor student in our district, that means it is equivalent to you not being a student that achieves well. And I'm not saying that crosses over in all different directions, but that's the story, that's the rhetoric that goes out, it comes out of some of you all's mouths, I hear you say it all the time, is that if you are a poor student, that means that you also are a failing student in our district.
What I continue to say is what the research says, that a building that is high and low SES students faces significant barriers. I think it would be very wrong, as you just said, to assume that a student from a household that's designated as low SES is a bad student. But we know that a school building that's 80%, 78, 79, 80%, I think of it barriers to learning as significant disadvantage than a student that's 8%, 12%, 16%. That's
I'm just saying, articulate that.
Exactly, it's important.
That's not always articulated.
Correct.
So the message that gets sent to
Then we need to be
our
clear on the
families that are
message.
low income is that means that their students are students who do not know how to be successful in school. That is the message that is in the community that is being presented from us as a board, that we gotta balance these numbers, because we get the numbers down, that means that the student achievement will go up. But that's not, you know what I'm saying? That's not necessary, because that's what we're saying, that's why we changed our boundaries, is if we get these numbers to 30%, 30%, 30%, that means that all of a sudden, all the students will be doing well. But if you go back when those numbers were lower, and our high schools had lower FRLs, we still saw student achievement issues across racial lines that still was not up to par. So somewhere in here, we're gonna have to have some serious conversations about some of the intersectionality that is happening. Instead of just looking at this one number, there's some things that are also not being discussed at this board table that we're leaving off because it's easier and it pacifies us more to say, see, this number is lower. And I don't think that that's all that is going on. There's more pieces to it. Just like you cannot easily say, if you're black, that means you're poor. If you're a low socioeconomic status student, that means that you are a failing student in our district and you're probably not going to graduate. I mean, like, that's a huge generalization, but that comes across in our board discussion many times that it's said it's a sweeping thing that's said, but it's said consistently. I've heard it said consistently since even before I got here. So I'm just saying we should be more cautious about the language that we use because we're telling the story as we're changing boundaries. We'll hear that same coded racialized language that'll pop up again that happened with the diversity policy, that happened with the other boundary discussion. We don't want to go to school with them. Who is them? You know what I mean? I just think I think we should be more conscious or educate ourselves about language that is used because it is powerful about how we're describing children because they have nothing to do with their parents' disenfranchisement and their inability to be able to get past some of the inequalities in our country. And I think we have to be conscious of that and how we're addressing it. I'm just putting it out there. You all can do what you want to do, but I'm just saying it's a constant rhetoric that we use. That low socioeconomic status and high FRL means that these are students who are failing. Are some of our students who are in that category doing that? Yes. But I would advise you all to be cautious about how you put that out in that language because I'm always making a conscious effort to be very cautious about that because you're talking about my family, you're talking about my neighbors, and some of them, I've seen them get through things that you would never believe and survive and have been really successful here in our district. So I want to be cautious about the story that we're telling about our students because it's inaccurate. That's my 2 cents. I'll shut up, y'all. Keep going on. But
Anything else on elementaries? Is there any secondary scenarios we want to get on the table?
I'd like to discuss the option of split feeders between elementary and junior high. I'd like straight feeders between junior high and high school, but between elementary and junior high, I'd like us to explore that.
Can you put that on paper or what the feeder system would be?
There are some specific places where it would make a lot of sense in our district where kids are closer to this elementary school, but then if you put them at that elementary school, they're going to end up clear over here for high school, and there's a high school right here. And the same for junior high. We've got kids that live right next to junior highs that if you assign them to a certain school, they don't get to go to that junior high. So I'm not opposed to splitting up the elementary schools.
Well, if you're talking secondary scenarios, I continue to wonder, we're talking about voluntary transfers. What are secondary options, or what are options for secondary school voluntary transfers to look like beginning in fall of 2017? Or 18, yeah. So, I think that perhaps part of what Director Roland is saying instead of intentionally splitting, maybe she's not saying this, but instead of intentionally splitting and saying, okay, half of this school goes here and half of this school goes here, having options for voluntary transfer, when we have the capability, it opens up some of those doors.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not what she's saying.
I don't know. I
think she wants more.
What I'd like to, there's okay, I'm just going to use a specific example. University housing. Nobody lives there for 12 years, right? It's short-term housing,
Right.
4 or 5 years.
Right.
So they could be assigned to Lincoln. They're actually closer to Lincoln than they are Borlaug. They go to Borlaug. They could go to Lincoln, but I don't think it makes sense when they're right next to West High and to Northwest. I don't think it makes sense to then send them to Southeast and City. But they could go to Lincoln. And that would make a lot of sense for them. But none of those kids, I should say none, it's not going to affect that population as much because they are a population that does not live in that rental housing for 12 years.
It's an interesting example because we might have a hole at Lincoln to fill.
Yeah. Well,
they are.
I think that perhaps extend not so much into split feeder, but into backfilling Lincoln. Right?
But that's one way to fill Lincoln if in fact North Lincoln ends up elsewhere.
Sure. If, in fact.
Right, and there's no, don't worry, we're not making any decisions today.
But if we would go putting that group at Lincoln and then say, okay, now, because you're at Lincoln, now you're going to Southeastern City, we'd probably have to bus them
I get
over
what
there.
you're saying.
Whereas they're right next to West.
I get what you're saying.
Well, if we could put pen to paper or even just conceptualize it, would be great, not that
So like the specific places I think it should be done, or what?
I'm just trying to understand what we think the alternate secondary scenarios are. Is it 4C or 5C from last time? Is it something different? What is it?
I think it's too early.
To what?
No, I would say it's too early. I'm hoping that, once we get through the elementary process or deeper into it, we might see some possibilities that we wouldn't have seen if we had done some things with the elementary schools.
Yep.
So I wouldn't be sort of interested in figuring out right now whether to change the secondary plan or how to change it.
Just recognizing Leonard Central, I know we said we'd look at it like after elementary, but there's going to be elementary decisions we make.
Well, it's an
Like the scenario
interaction.
you just talked about.
Yeah, that's
To
why I bring
interact.
it up.
Yeah.
Anything else in secondary for tonight? Anything else on attendance zones? All right, enrollment / class size / demographics.
Yeah, we just, we're ready to get DeYoung Richter locked in to do their work for us this summer and next fall. And I know that one of the questions was, is there anything else that we want to ask them? So we put that on the agenda today, since you saw the enrollment report today, and a lot of the things that we asked DeYoung Richter to do are directly interconnected with that. So is there anything, think about it kind of like we just did with the maps. Is there anything that you would like to know that you don't know? I don't know if they can do it, but it's definitely, we'll have that conversation with them here in the next week.
The underlying assumption is they're not going to do anything until we finish this process, right?
They'll do.
We need to have elementary boundaries, or it's pointless.
Yes, but what they'll do is they gather the underlying data. So they look for birth records. They reach out to each of the municipalities and ask what's platted. What is it platted for? Is it single? Is it multi? What is it? Because then they've got the yield rates for that kind of housing in that particular geographic area. So they'll start to build. I'll borrow your terminology. They start to build some of the building blocks underneath. Then once we build a fence around it that says this is the attendance area, then that feeds into that. So does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I have a little side question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether in the previous enrollment report, or their previous projections, to what extent, or do we know, did they sort of project this Scanlon Farms development? Is that sort of incorporated already into our projections, or is that going to totally change what we think is going to happen?
I think,
A little bit.
and I don't have it in front of me.
And it would
Wasn't
all
part of it
be
platted?
reflected in the Wickham number, right?
I think part of it was platted.
If you look at it, it's a high growth area.
Yeah, I
And
know.
it wouldn't be a high growth area though.
The reason that I say I'm not sure is actually, believe it or not, but on the northwest corner of that property. So when you think about that roundabout, so across the street from the high school, from you
Right.
across the street from the high school, that's already platted. So that's in their factoring, and then there's a neighborhood north of it,
Okay.
already platted. So those are in their factoring. The farms, I can't remember if it was platted or
But
not.
you're on my 2 points. One, I want to see future
Future what?
boundaries, whatever we decide they are.
Yes.
Yeah, you want them to base it on the catchment areas that come up with this spring.
And 2, we really want our cities to be able to input at some point.
Right.
Maybe the housing association or whatever, to say, here's what's going to happen in the next 5 years. So,
Well, that's an easy one because we can include that as part of that dialogue with them. Because right now they work directly with the city planning folks at all 5 municipalities. So they're out in Johnson County, so they're already gathering that from them. So if there's, I think about our Friday meeting, is that this week? The housing group that meets.
Affordable housing, yeah.
Yeah, so, if there's input that we need from them, we can
but
get
when
it.
we've met with each city, we've
Yeah.
reinforced with them input into the enrollment report's key, right?
Yeah,
Because it impacts the facilities master plan, so.
yep.
Well, I mean, the reason I'm asking, it kind of really is more relevant to what we just finished talking about, but to the extent that that development is already incorporated into our Wickham projections that we already have, that we're going to be using when we figure out how many people we can put at Wickham, that's kind of important to know.
It is, and well, it's kind of important to know what we think is the Wickham boundary, because that's gonna change which platted future developments they're gonna scoop when they do the catchment counts, so that's why you're
Yes, no,
earlier-
totally, but,
Yeah,
but even
you're-
for us to figure out where that boundary is, we need to know what's coming in the Wickham territory.
Yeah,
you
now
know?
that is gonna be a little bit tougher because we can go back and look at the previous enrollment reports and we can do some extrapolation based on what's in there to look at it and say, okay, we know how many kids are at Wickham, we know what their projected growth rate is. Because I don't think in the underlying raw data that we see, we don't actually, they're not sharing with us all that plat map research.
Mhm.
We don't actually see any of that, even in the early data
As long as
files.
it's input in there.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying is it's
Chicken and
kinda like
egg.
chicken or an egg,
Yeah.
exactly. And
A little bit.
I don't think we see the chicken, so we got to go with the egg.
Right. Well, you're right, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Maybe we sort of eyeball
Yeah.
and figure out
So we
how
might-
much
that-
of
we
that
might
we
have
think
to
is
do that.
really
We might have to do
attributable to
some-
what's coming up there
Yeah,
and how
we
much
might have to
is.
do some interpolation of that.
I was thinking, I was looking at what they did for us last time, and really, you know, of the enrollment report, there's only about 8 pages that are projections.
Right.
The projections, remember last time we did all our normal projections, then they did those catchment area projections, which was different than enrollment projections.
Right.
I like the idea of catchment area projections, but I did not like those because
Okay.
it told me the total number of K-12 students
Oh.
in the Lemme area. I want to know the total number of Lemme, the total number of K-6 students in the Lemme area. That's what I do.
Yeah, it was
So
like
you want
all
that
students.
broken out by
Right.
grade level?
Yeah, well, not by grade level, but by
By band,
K6,
or band, elementary,
not
seven,
exactly
eight,
band,
grade level,
thank
but
you.
band, yeah.
If that were broken out by band level, that would be great. And so for the high school, we just need 3.
See, that should be relatively easy to do because they're just pulling that off the data set.
They've got
They already have
Yeah.
the data set in
Just how
there,
we want it.
and they've already got them age banded in there. So all we got, they just have to define the age band.
So that's the only change I could see
Okay.
in what they gave us. And as far as additional things, well, you know, I don't know if it's possible, but they don't do any projecting about, you know, SES changes. I don't think they could do that on an attendance area basis. But if they could maybe tell us something about it, I don't know if that's their specialty or not.
I'll
but-
ask. I think I think they're gonna have. I think they're gonna struggle with that.
Yeah, well, if that's
Um,
if that's not their expertise,
yeah.
then we shouldn't ask them to do it.
Yeah, I'll ask them about that though. The other thing
But,
is,
you know,
of
we've
course,
got all these,
their expertise evolves over time. Sometimes we forget to ask them what to do. So,
It seems like we have a lot of discussion of, you know, what's coming in terms of the different secondary schools, in terms of FRL, or whatever our new term is for that. And it's, you know, I just wish the data was a little bit stronger that we were making those estimates from, you know, because it seems like we're just kind of
yeah.
assuming that what's passed is prologue, and I don't know. So I don't, if there's any way that they can help us figure out where that might be going.
I will try to encapsulate that and see what they can do.
Yeah.
It's a good generic question. Any new capabilities or what are
Mhm.
other people asking for?
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Oh, the other, I don't mean to keep monopolizing. When you get this report, does someone from the Young Richter come and sit at the table and talk to us for a little bit? That'd be nice.
We've had them here before.
Okay.
Usually when they deliver it to us, we usually get on the WebEx with them and try to get all of our questions answered before in the draft form.
Mhm.
I think we haven't had them here though.
Could be.
We haven't had them here when you've been here, have we?
It's a good question. I've been to meetings where they presented. I'm not sure if I was on the board or not.
I think they haven't been in the district. I don't think they've been here in 4 years.
I would just be curious about certain things, about the methodology or
Mhm.
whatever. Be able to ask them those questions would be nice.
We can definitely ask them. I don't think they have any problem coming at all.
Anything else?
Oh, it's 10:30.
Entertain a motion to adjourn?
Someone.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.